رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So inshallah today we'll continue with the Fiqh Shafi'i course. We stopped somewhere at within the Arkan al-Salah, the integrals or the Arkan or the pillars of prayer. This is the chapter that has probably the most information in it that is relevant because this is very much attached or associated with your daily activities. You pray 5 times a day, so knowing this stuff is important. Before we go on, I'll explain two things. Number one, regarding questions, keep them till the end. If I have time at the end, I'll answer them. If I don't, then just put them in the Google Classroom, and then I will go through those questions. And then the next time I come around, if one of those questions is not going to be addressed within the course syllabus, then I'll answer it and I'll explain it. And if it's going to be addressed in the course syllabus, then we'll just keep on going, because a lot of the questions, most of the questions I'm getting asked are just a little bit premature. If you just gave me another maybe month or less, we'll come by something where the author, rahimahullah, actually explains it or talks about it, or its time will come. Second thing is what's really important to me is that you walk away from this course, inshallah, with the proper understanding of how you're supposed to deal with madhahib in general and with fiqh specifically. Meaning, our job here as Muslims is to have a default way of doing things. You have to have a default way of doing stuff. And that default way is one of the 4 madhahib. Meaning, why? Because it's yeah, are you guys still able to see if it's up like that? Okay, just as long as they can see it, because I don't want to be. Having a default method of practicing your religion. If you don't have a default method, you're just taking from everywhere, then you don't really have anything to depend upon. So having a madhab is basically just having a default way of practicing Islam. And then if you have that default way, you can either build upon it by going more deeper into that methodology or that school of jurisprudence, or you start learning other schools so you have more information. But you have a default way. It's like learning the Quran, for example. You don't start memorizing the Quran in all 20 recitations or 10 recitations, and they're different. You memorize the Quran and learn it in one recitation specifically. It's just one way of doing it. You know it like the back of your hand. You know it 100%, and then you go study other qira'at, right? You have to have a default, though. You have to have a default way of reciting the Quran, just like you have a default way of practicing Islam. So you learn a madhab, you understand it, you practice Islam based on that madhab, and then if you have issues within that madhab, within that school of thought, there are certain practices that are causing you grief or are very relevant to you or are difficult, then you go ahead and you take that one issue and you study it and you flesh it out, and you look at the different pieces of evidence that support the different opinions that exist, and you choose the opinion that makes most sense to you and that allows you to function better within your life. And that is what we're supposed to walk away from at the end of understand. This is how you're supposed to practice Islam. This is the methodology that we're supposed to walk down. So learning a madhab is actually, in my opinion, a necessity for every Muslim. At least studying one text, just having a default. Now to one degree or the other, you have a default, but it's not based on studying. It's based on whatever your parents did, or whatever your Islamic studies teacher taught you, or whatever you observed people in your community doing. And that's not a very strong default. That's not something you should be defaulting to. You should default to a methodology of behavior that hundreds and thousands of scholars over years have supported, so you can be very comfortable with. And then, obviously, you can branch out when issues become difficult. Or, for example, when we talked about in the Shafi'i madhab, if a man and a woman touch, then they lose their wudu. Well, that may be very difficult then you can go and you can study within the madhab itself, or outside of the madhab, other opinions that may allow you to function a little bit better by looking at the different pieces of evidence and where it came from. Same thing goes for dogs. Things are a lot of different, but you have to have a default, and this is why we're doing this. You need to have something to base it on. Again, a part of my evaluation of this course is making sure you understood this. If you can't articulate this to me at the end, or if you walk away understanding that this is the only way to practice Islam, or this course was showing you how this stuff is not relevant, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to give you a default for practice and teach you whenever something becomes very relevant, how we can go and look at the different pieces of opinion, different pieces of evidence, and different opinions that regard a specific ruling, and then how to respectfully kind of go through it and choose something that works for us. So, وَأَرْكَانُ الصَّلَاةِ ثَمَانِيَةَ عَشَرَ رُكْنًا, as the Musannif said, rahimahullah, وَنَفَعْنَا بِعِلْمِهِ. The pillars of prayer are 18 pillars. And he goes on, and you should know them. These are very important for you to know. Out of everything, you have to memorize these ones. Know them well, because they make a difference in terms of your validity of your prayer, which is one of the most important acts of worship that you'll do in your life. Number one is, of course, the niyyah, which is intention. And number two, al-qiyamu ma'al-qudra, standing when one is capable of doing so. And I pointed out that if someone, for example, cannot stand for long periods of time, then they're allowed to sit in prayer, but they have to make takbirat al-ihram standing up. So if you're able to walk, then you should do takbirat al-ihram standing up, and then you can sit after that and continue your prayer sitting down. But you should initiate salah in the position of standing up if you're able to do so. If you're not able to stand up at all, then yeah, you can pray lying down. That's not a problem. But if you're able to stand and walk and do, then you should initiate your prayer in standing up and then go ahead and sit down afterwards. With takbiratul ihram is saying the opening Allahu Akbar. So the opening takbir is a rukn. So if you don't do the opening takbir, then you have to go back and repeat your prayer or start from the beginning. وقراءة الفاتحة وبسم الله الرحمن الرحيم آية منها, and you're reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and the Shafi'is are very specific on the fact that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is an ayah. So for the Shafi'is, you have to recite it. Now they do it, the Shafi'i, in the Shafi'i madhab, we do it out loud for prayers that are jahr, for like Maghrib and Isha and Fajr. The Imam would recite, if you go to Syria, most of masajid, they recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim out loud. Yeah? And that is the sunnah for the Shafi'is, but they're okay with you doing it secretly as long as you do it. But for the Shafi'is, if you don't do it at all, you actually invalidate your prayer, because they see Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim as a verse from Al-Fatiha, so you have to say it. You have to at least, or the Imam should. The one after that is wal-ruku', so bowing, wal-tuma'ninatu fihi, and reposing therein. I talked about reposing last time, and that it's not something that is objectively measured. It is subjectively measured, but you have to have some measurement for it. So whether it's based on the fact that all of your body parts are still for a couple of seconds, or the time that is needed to say Subhana Rabbiyal Azim wa bihamdihi once, whatever measurement you want to use is fine. The Shafi'is have different ways of measuring it, but there has to be some measurement of reposing, because it's a rukn. It's a pillar, and it's a pillar that's repeated 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Right? So it's 4 times repeated. So out of the 18, 4 of these pillars are just tuma'neen. I mean, making sure that you're giving any given one of these, all of these actions, the appropriate time it deserves. So you're not just kind of moving up and down with no stops. وَالرَّفْعُ وَالْاعْتِدَالُ, so rising and standing straight. سَمِعَ اللَّهُ لِمَنْ حَمِدَهُ, when you stand up, that's another rukn. وَالطُّمَأْنِينَةُ فِيهِ, reposing therein. وَالسُّجُودُ, prostrating. وَالطُّمَأْنِينَةُ فِيهِ, reposing therein. وَالْجُلُوسُ بَيْنَ السَّجْدَتَيْن, and sitting between the 2 prostrations. وَالطُّمَأْنِينَةُ فِيهِ, and reposing therein. وَالْجُلُوسُ الْأَخِيرُ, so the final sitting. The final sitting is a rukn, right? The final one. The one that you do taslim, and the one before isn't, and we'll point out in a moment. وَالتَّشَهُّدُ فِيهِ, and saying the tashahhud, you can say whatever type of tashahhud that you want. The Shafi'is are open on that one. They have a specific one that they go by, but it doesn't really matter. Whatever tashahhud that you memorize should suffice. وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وَسَلَّمَ فِيهِ, and doing the salat ala nabi, which is salat al-Ibrahimiyya, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. However, the rukn part, the pillar part, is just saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. If you say that, then your salah is fine. So if you say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, your prayer works. Is that yani optimal? No. The rest of the salat al-Ibrahimiyya is sunnah. You should perform them, the whole thing. You're actually going against the sunnah when you don't. But I'm just telling you what aspect about salawat al-Ibrahimiyya or Allahumma salli is actually a pillar. It's the first couple of words. Those are the pillars. And everything after that is a sunnah. With taslimatul ula, so the saying the first salamu alaikum. So in prayer, when you say salamu alaikum, that's the pillar to leave prayer. The second one is a sunnah. So we say both of them in prayer, but again, it's important for these logistics. When you say the first one, your prayer is technically over. When you say the first one. That's why when we're sitting in tashahhud behind the imam, the moment the imam says salamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, he's out of his prayer, we can stand up and continue. You don't have to wait. Again, other madhab have different opinions, but for this one, for us, for the Shafi'i, it's very simple. If you're sitting behind the tashahhud al-akhir, you have a rak'ah that you have to make up for because you only got maybe 2 or 3. So when the imam says salamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, he says the first one, the prayer is technically over. He's left prayer, so you're good to stand up, because you shouldn't be moving if your imam is still in prayer. But the moment your imam is no longer in prayer, you should go up, stand up, and get whatever rak'at that you missed. So the moment he says Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi al-ula, the first one, then that's the pillar, and the prayer is now technically over. So you're allowed to stand up and continue, and you're allowed to wait for the second one as well. Both the behaviors and both practices are completely valid. وَالنِّيَّةُ الْخُرُوجِ مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ, and intending to exit from prayer, and this one here is debated within the madhab, so actually it's no longer a valid one. So you can actually just note that this one is no longer valid. وَتَرْتِيبُ الْأَرْكَانِ عَلَى مَا ذَكَرْنَا, and performing these pillars in sequence. In the sequence, obviously you can't play around with the sequence of salah. Okay. I don't want you to know any of these pieces of evidence here because they're not that relevant to you. But know this: reposing is defined as enough time to say tasbihah, or allowing the body parts to exist in the desired pose properly, just giving them time to kind of exist calmly. And then intending to leave prayer is a sunnah for the majority of the Shafi'i scholars. It's no longer a pillar. And pillars, integrals, or arkan of prayer are actions that necessitate repeating the prayer if you do not do, or going back and doing it if you forget and are still in prayer. And the sujood sahw is needed at the end. So if I forget, for example, the first jalsa bain as-sajdatain, or I have to go back and get it. If I do sujood and then I don't sit and do sujood, I just stand up and do the other rak'ah, and then I remember I didn't do actually the jalsa, and then I lost the rukn. I go back down and I get them again, and I continue my prayer. And at the end of my prayer, before I do taslim, I do sujood as-sahw, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But that's just for you to know. A few things, a few kind of points here that we should point out regarding salah. For when it comes to ruku', for the Shafi'is and for the majority of the other schools of thought, the back should be flat, right? Especially for men. The back should be flat. So you extend your arms out and you hold on to your knees, and your back should be flat. And your head should not be down like this. It should be parallel to your back. Right? And then you're looking down between your feet, or you're looking at your sujood. And there's difference of opinion within the madhab where you should be looking. It's not a problem. Okay. Because that won't come up in the next bit, so I'll point that out. I think we can move on from this. So these are what the pillars are. A lot of the details around this will come up in the next couple of slides in terms of how to do certain things. But it's important to know that these arkan, these are pillars. If you miss any of them by mistake, then you have to go back and get them again. And then you have to do sujood sahw. And if you leave one purposefully, which is very weird, but let's say for some reason purposefully you let, then your salah is immediately invalid. And you have to go repeat your salah all over again. Talk about the sunan. وَسُنَنُهَا قَبْلَ الدُّخُولِ فِيهَا شَيْئًا. And there are two actions that are recommended prior to commencing prayer, prior to the prayer. Al-adhanu wal-iqama. So giving the prayer to the adhan and the iqama, or the call for its commencement. And this can be done even when you're alone. So even when you're alone, it's sunnah. It's recommended. It doesn't. There's no legal obligation to do it, but it's a sunnah for you to make an adhan and then to make an iqama. To point, and this is not only the Shafi'is who are like this. It's the majority of the schools of thought that see that even when you're doing it alone. And I see this done more in our brothers and sisters from India and Pakistan than it's done in Arab homes, unfortunately. So they're very good at holding on to that sunnah. They make adhan in their houses and they do iqama. A lot of us don't do it, but it's a good sunnah to adhere to if possible. وَبَعْدَ الدُّخُولِ فِيهَا شَيْئًا. And after the commencement of prayer, there are two actions that are recommended within prayer itself. Number one, التشهد الأول, the first tashahhud. And number two, القنوت في الصبح وفي الوتر وفي النصف الثاني من شهر رمضان. And making the qunut. Qunut is when you make dua. The imam makes dua in salah after ruku', when he goes Sami Allahu liman hamida, and he makes dua. That is called qunut, right? And that's what they're referring to here. So qunut في الصبح and during fajr, in the second rak'ah. For Shafi'is, is a sunnah. And mind you, the word sunnah here, just put like a red line under it and hold on to it for a moment, because I have to come back to it in a second, because the nomenclature of the Shafi'is is different than the nomenclature of other madhahib when they use the word sunnah here specifically. والقنوت في الصبح وفي الوتر في النصف الثاني من رمضان. And then with witr prayer in the second half of Ramadan. So if you go to Syria and to a lot of the countries that follow the Shafi'i madhab, you'll find that they make dua in every fajr, in the second rak'ah every fajr after ruku', every day. And then in Ramadan, the first 15 nights they won't make dua in witr. They'll just pray witr without dua, and then the last 15 nights they will do it. So these are the sunnah. Now, sunnahs here is meant to be ab'ad. This is a word that you'll find in the books of the Shafi'i madhab. They use the word ab'ad or sunan for the rest of the madhab, which is equivalent to wajib for the Hanafis and Hanbalis, which necessitates a prostration, sujood sahw at the end of prayer if forgotten. Whether prayer is invalidated if one leaves ab'ad on purpose is an issue of difference of opinion within the madhab. So the ones that he just talked about right now, these two that we just talked about, التشهد الأول والقنوت في الصبح, these are ab'ad. which is the terminology that the Shafi'is came up with years later. They use the word sunnah for it. But the word sunnah for all the other madhahib, meaning if you go to the Hanafi books and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, they use the word sunnah as just something that is recommended, that necessitates nothing. Meaning if you don't do it, there's nothing that needs to be made up for. The Shafi'is specifically, they use the word sunnah a lot, and they mean by it something that no, if you leave, then you will end up having to do sujood sahu at the end. And the examples for it is tashahhud al-awwal. So tashahhud al-awwal, if you're making sujood, it's your second rak'ah, and you're supposed to come up for the first tashahhud, asr for example, or isha, and you don't, you stand up. So that to them is from the ab'ad, or they use the word sunnah. So it's not a rukn, it's not a pillar, but it's also not something that goes unpunished, meaning you have to make up for it with sujood sahu at the end. However, the rest of the madhahib, their terminology when they use the word sunnah means that if you leave this, there's no penalty for it. You just keep on going. But for the Shafi'is, when they use the word sunnah in a lot of their books, they mean by it what's equivalent to the word wajib for the Hanafis and Hanbalis. Again, so there's this issue of terminology. That's why you have to study one madhab, have a default, and then to learn. So you have rukn, and then you have, which is a pillar, and then you have a sunnah, which is something that, rukn, if you don't do it, you lose your prayer. Sunnah, if you don't do it, no problem. But then you have something in between. So the Hanafis use the word wajib for it, and the Hanbalis use the same thing. The Shafi'is use the word ab'ad for that one. And sometimes they use the word sunnah for that one. But if they use the word sunnah for that one, then what are they using for the word sunnah that everyone else uses? They use the word hayat. Wa hayatuha. These are lesser recommended actions. So let me explain again. So the word rukn, pillar, or integrals, this is a word that all of the madhahib agree to use, right? And these are things that you have to do. If you don't do, you have to make up by going back and doing them again. And it requires sujood sahu. And if you leave them purposefully, you lose your prayer. Your prayer is invalid. Now, that's taken care of. Now we have two other categorizations you have things that if you don't do, purposefully or non-purposefully makes no difference. And commonly the word sunnah is used to explain that from a jurisprudent perspective. And something in between where if you don't do it, you don't lose your prayer. You don't have to go back and make up for it, but a sujood sahu is going to be necessitated for it at the end if forgotten. And then if you don't do it on purpose, whether you lose your prayer or not is an issue of difference of opinion. So something in the middle. So this thing in the middle, the majority, the Hanbalis and Hanafis call it wajib. The Malikis have a completely different breakdown. I'm not going to go into that one. They call it wajib or they call it wajib. The Shafi'iyya, they call it ab'ad, but they also refer to it as sunnah in their books. Taking us to, well, this thing over here that you just said sunnah, well, the Shafi'iyya call that hayat. They call it hayat, which is what hayatuha, 15 khasla. That makes sense? So the Shafi'i played around a little bit with the terminology. Again, this was just based on how they studied what they thought was the appropriate word to use to describe something. So the Imam Shafi'i, for him, the word sunnah was more than just a recommended action. For him, this is something the Prophet ﷺ did, we have to do. We should not be messing around with it. We should definitely do it. But if we don't do it, we shouldn't invalidate our prayer for. So that's how he understood it. The rest of the madhahib didn't necessarily use that terminology. So again, the rukn pillars are agreed upon. Then we have two other categorizations. Something that's not a problem if you lose at all. The majority call sunan. The majority call sunnah. Shafi'i call them hayat. And then this thing in the middle, the majority call wajib. Shafi'i called sunnah. So that's why the word sunnah, that's why if you study a book of fiqh by yourself, right? You will be completely confused because you don't know the nomenclature. You don't know exactly what the terminology that is being used for. That's why these type of things have to be learned. You have to actually come and learn them. So if you're reading a Shafi'i book and the word sunnah comes up, you're not sure what they mean by it. And then what you could end up doing is missing that the tashahhud al-awwal, the first tashahhud, he's saying it's sunnah. So you're like, oh, it's sunnah. So sunnah, if I don't do it at all, no problem. No, if you don't do it on purpose, you could invalidate your prayer for a large chunk of scholars. And if you forget it, you have to do sujood sahu for it. So it's not something you just leave out because it's sunnah, because their usage of the word sunnah is different than the majority of the madhahib that exist. Did I make sense with all that? Okay. So this is the small breakdown that you can use to kind of understand that in general. So the two things that we talked about at the beginning are called ab'ad, right? That's what the Shafi'i use. He used the word sunnah in his text, but the word ab'ad is what is used in most Shafi'i books. And I broke down for you what that understands, what that means. So hayatuha, and here's what sunnahs are for the majority of scholars. 15 خصلة. We're talking about 15 different actions. Number 1, رفع اليدين عند تكبيرة الإحرام وعند الركوع والرفع منه. So for the Shafi'iyya, it's raising your hands when you're doing takbirat al-ihram. So it's a sunnah or a hay'ah, right? Depending on the terminology. So for the purpose of this course, I'll use the word hay'ah, but now you understand why I'm using it. Because the terminology of the Shafi'is, if I say sunnah, then I'm actually lying to you because that's not what a sunnah is for them, right? But you understand at least what's equivalent to what. So a hay'ah is what we tend to understand as sunnah, as something that has no consequence if you don't do it. That's what, and the Shafi'is call that a hay'ah. Anything that you don't do has no consequence to, then that is a hay'ah. So putting up your hands during takbirat al-ihram, and during the takbir when you make ruku', and during the takbir when you come up. For the Shafi'iyya, those three are hay'at, meaning and they're recommended for us to do. How do they make takbir? The Shafi'is make takbir where the hands are facing towards the qibla, it's exactly the same movement you would make if you're making tawaf. You're done Umrah, every time you come to the Hajar al-Aswad, you turn to it, you say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, you put it up the same thing. So it's actually the same movement. It's actually the same idea. We're doing this towards the Hajar al-Aswad, towards the Kaaba. The concept is the same. How high do they put their hands? They put their hands either up, somewhere up, حذو المنكبين, so close to their shoulders, right? Now the Hanafis do it different. The Hanafis go up, they're up here, right? So there's a known story where Abdullah ibn Mubarak is praying with Abu Hanifa. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak was praying, he was doing it more in the Shafi'i. The Shafi'i wasn't alive yet, but he was doing it. So he would make a couple of takbirat. Allahu Akbar for tahram, Allahu Akbar for his ruku', and then again, right? Hanafis just do it one big one, right? So Abdullah ibn Mubarak is joking with Abu Hanifa. He told him, well, I felt the wind of your takbir was going to throw me out of the masjid. So he told him, and I thought that you were going to fly. And there's no problem, obviously, between them. But there's just different ways of, again, interpreting the evidence. So for the Shafi'iyya, the hay'ah for them is to raf' al-yadayn and takbirat al-ihram. And again, it's up to the shoulders, right? It's not up, it's up to the shoulders. It's towards the qibla. And it's done for takbirat al-ihram, Allahu Akbar, starting the prayer. And then Allahu Akbar for ruku'. And then Sami Allahu liman hamida again. And that's it. They don't do it any other times. The Hanabila have a different way of doing it, and so do Malikiyya. So they have different opinions on that, and they move their hands a little bit more throughout the prayer. But the Shafi'i is just these three moments that we do. Again, we're learning a default here. So you have to learn this, do it, and then if you want to spread out and learn more things, then you can go ahead and do that. وَوَضْعُ الْيَمِينِ عَلَى الشِّمَالِ. And then putting the right hand, or did I miss something? No. So putting the right hand over the left, right? For the Shafi'is, it's between the chest and the navel. It's somewhere around here. For other madhahib, you'll find them, it's down here. It's supporting the karsh, basically. But it's down here. And that's fine. Either way, there's evidence for both. But putting it somewhere between the navel and the chest, for women, specifically for the Shafi'is, they go a bit higher. Above their chest is where they put it. But for men, it's between the chest and the navel. And the word yad in Arabic means from here to here. All this is yad. So where exactly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Put wherever, it doesn't make a difference. And there's no, and the mu'tamad and the Shafi'iyya is something that is debated. I mean, what the prominent opinion for the Shafi'iyya is actually very debated within the madhab itself. So it doesn't make a difference. There's two ways to do it. We can do it like this. It's just basically a placement. And there's abd, where you actually hold on. And both of them are acceptable for the Shafi'is, and both of them are acceptable for the majority of opinions. Obviously, you'll stand by people who are praying with their hands down. And that's the Maliki mu'tamad in their madhab. For the Malikis, they put their hands down. They don't put them up at all. And they have, again, it's all based on interpretation of evidence and how they look at things and where they got these behaviors from. But for the Shafi'is, it's between the navel and the chest, and you hold on to a part of the arm, right? And specifically for men, because for women it's up, it's a bit higher, they end up not really having a lot of horizontal, pushing outwards. But for men, if you don't hold on to the right piece, you could end up making the prayer for the person beside you extremely uncomfortable. I've prayed like so many times where someone's elbow is like right in my gut, like he has it right in there because he has to hold it on this piece here, and somehow that's what he was told. So no, hold on to whatever way where you can keep your shoulder stuck to the shoulder of the person beside you, and you're not actually basically shoving your elbow into someone's gut. So it doesn't matter whether you're holding it from the wrist up to the right beside the elbow. This is all holding onto the hand, and it's the yasar over the yamin. It's a hay'ah. So even for the Shafi'is, you put your hand down, what happens? Nothing happens. This whole thing is a hay'ah. So if you don't do it, there's no penalty. التوجه is saying the opening supplication. Now, I'm not going to go through it for you here because it's a long one. وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض. It's a long توجه. But basically, this is referring to any dua of istiftah, any supplication of beginning of prayer. And there's a lot of them. There's a list of them. I'll provide a few of them into the Google Classroom for you to look at later. But for the Shafi'iyya specifically, they like the one they call it dua at-tawajjuh because it starts with وجهت وجهي. I have my face facing the Kaaba, but it's a long one for the Shafi'i. So if you haven't memorized it, maybe you want to memorize it, and it has a hadith that it supports it. But there are shorter ones that you can use that also suffice. So it's a hayya as well. Well, isti'adha is saying أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم at the beginning of after you say that, after you say dua al-istiftah, the opening supplication, whether it's وجهت وجهي or سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك or الله أكبر كبيرا والحمد لله كثيرا, or whatever it is that you want to say. Then for the Shafi'i, it's a hayya to say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم before you actually start reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. والجهر في موضعه والإسرار في موضعه. So reciting audibly when appropriate and quietly when appropriate. What does that mean? Well, for Dhuhr and Asr, it should be quiet, and for Maghrib and Isha, Maghrib in the first 2 rak'ah, Isha first 2 rak'ah, and the 2 rak'ah Fajr, you do it audibly. And then again, the evidence of this is mostly behavioral. There's two types of evidence that you will learn, inshallah, if you attend Shaykh Ziyad al-Qaisi's hadith, is that you have sayings that the Prophet ﷺ provided, and then you have actions that he provided, and then people followed along. And both of them are valid pieces of evidence, meaning what people watched him do and then did like him is also evidence, because he didn't necessarily have to say every single movement. He just did the prayers and people watched him, and then he said, صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي, and then pray the way I pray, so they prayed like him. So sometimes there's a hadith fi'li and amali, I mean based on what he did alayhi salatu wasalam, and this is what they actually observed him do for the 15 years that he was doing this alayhi salatu wasalam, where you recite audibly in certain rak'at and secretly in other rak'at. And it's a hay'ah, so if you don't do it, it's not a problem, even if it's up front in front of people. And if you mix up and someone is in, here's an example, if you're praying dhuhr and you forget in Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, then you go quiet down, there's no sujood sahu required for this, or repetition of anything, or even tasbih. Like no one has to actually say subhanallah behind them, because you only say subhanallah to correct someone if they forgot a pillar, or they made a mistake regarding a pillar or a wajib or a sunnah for the Shafi'iyya. But a hay'ah or a sunnah for the majority, you don't have to actually go ahead and say that to them, leave them, it's no big deal. What ta'meen, which is saying ameen at the end of Surah Al-Fatiha for the imam and the ma'mum. For the imam and the ma'mum, for the person who's leading prayer and the person who's behind prayer, both have a sunnah for them to say ameen. وَقِرَاءَةُ السُّورَةِ بَعْدَ الْفَاتِحَةِ, and reciting a verse from the Quran, at least, the minimum, after Surah Al-Fatiha, it's a hay'ah. So if someone stands for Surah Al-Isha and recites out loud Surah Al-Fatiha, Allahu Akbar, and goes down, nothing is required at all, because it's a hay'ah to recite a surah after Surah Al-Fatiha. This is not so that you go ahead and do these things, it's so that you have the technical knowledge of what you would require. You're still going to try and pray, the goal of learning this stuff is that you learn to pray your prayer optimally, so you can do it perfectly. But also knowing that when something is missing or you miss something, what requires repetition, repeating the prayer, what invalidates it, what requires sujood sahu, what requires nothing. We don't teach these things so that you can basically figure out the minimalistic prayer where you do the least possible. Again, you have no way to know that anything that you do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is accepted. So for you to minimalize everything is basically decreasing any possibility of this being accepted. So you want to try and do all of these hay'at to the best of your ability. You want to do all of these hay'at if possible. Yeah. No, verse. So if you just say the sunnah is just wal asr, that suffices. That's more than enough. Of course, the more you go, the better. أفضل الصلاة طول القيام, as he said. The best salah is the one that has the longest standing piece, which is the beginning, where you recite as much Quran as possible. But it suffices just to say one verse is more than enough. والتكبيرات عند الخفض والرفع, and then saying Allahu Akbar when rising and descending. So this is not regarding, he talked about moving the hands, right? But I'm talking about saying takbir. So going down, saying Allahu Akbar, Sami Allahu Hamida, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Saying those Allahu Akbars are all hayat. So if you don't say them and you just move, your salah is valid. However, if imam, that's a problem because you're basically ruining everyone's prayer behind you and you are responsible for that. So ahkamul imam are a little bit different, and in these texts were not designed to explain how an imam is supposed to behave. It's mostly the ma'mum, but because the imam has other rulings that we have to abide by in order for us for our prayers to be valid and the people behind us as well. وَقَوْلُ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ لِمَنْ حَمِدَهُ رَبَّنَا لَكَ الْحَمْدُ. And saying that specifically because, so all the takbirat and سَمِعَ اللَّهُ لِمَنْ حَمِدَهُ are all hayat, as I explained. وَالتَّسْبِيحُ فِي الرُّكُوعِ وَالسُّجُودِ. And doing tasbih, saying Subhana Rabbi al-Azim when bowing and Subhana Rabbi al-A'la when prostrating. So this is a hay'ah for the Shafi'iyya. This is a hay'ah for the Shafi'iyya. For the other madhahib, they see it saying at least once is a wajib and the rest are sunnah. For the Shafi'iyya, no. So you could easily, for the Shafi'i, you can go down and if you don't say anything, if you don't say those, your salah is still fine. So if someone makes sujood and fails to say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la and makes dua instead or something, then their salah is still valid. And this helps especially converts because some of the converts find it very difficult to say certain words. So you can actually figure out for them what's acceptable within a certain method where they can easily pray and not have to say more than maybe just aspects of Surah Al-Fatiha, and their prayer still be valid until they learn. ووضع اليدين على الفخذين في الجلوس يبسط اليسرى ويقبض اليمنى إلا المسبحة فإنه يشير بها متشهدا. All right, so this is regarding putting the hands on the thighs when we're sitting for tashahhud, when we're sitting for julus, specifically for tashahhud. So he says here, putting the hands on the thighs في الجلوس يبسط اليسرى ويقبض اليمنى. يبسط meaning it has it out. يقبض meaning it has it closed down. So when we're sitting, on the right, it's open, it's extended, and on the left, it's extended. On the right, you have it closed. إلا المسبحة. المسبحة is this finger here. يشير بها متشهدا. So you move it for tashahhud. All right. Now, what about the settings when we're not doing that? Meaning there's no tashahhud. What about the julus? So they differ within the madhab, whether you keep it like this or you keep it like that. What I was taught is to actually keep it closed, like keep the right closed, even if it's not for tashahhud. But both practices within the madhab al-Shafi'i are fine, and with other madhab as well. Now, here comes the piece that we'll talk about for a few minutes. Where did I put it? Sorry? Behind the chair. Oh, okay. So here's a piece that we'll talk about for a moment. All right. So just focus on this one here. I'll talk about this in a moment. For the Shafi'is, during tashahhud, you extend the second finger upwards once you say illallah. All right? So for the Shafi'is, this is how we do it. So, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And then it stays like that until the end of prayer. Meaning your finger stays upwards until the end of prayer, doesn't go down. The opposite of what the Hanafiya do. The Hanafiya say, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And it goes down until the end of prayer. So it's actually literally the opposite. Like the Hanafis put up, once they put down, we put up, and it stays until the end. Yes?
Just another thing, like in terms of the placement of the hands, does it matter in terms of like, does it have to be on your knees?
Okay, so it should be on your thigh and up to your, so this would be knees, which no one does this. None of the Dhahab are okay with this. So it's all up here, it's the thigh. How far up is differed upon? It's more al-abad. It should be the farther piece of your thigh, meaning closer to your knees than to your pelvis. It should be closer down to your knees, and it doesn't matter between men and women either. There's no difference whether it's closer or a bit farther down. So for the Shafi'is, we say, you extend it, say illallah, and keep it up till the end with no extra movement. You don't move it, it just stays up. The rest of the fingers are retracted, as I explained. The Hanafis extend the second finger upwards when you say La ilaha, and then lower it until the end of the tashahhud. The Hanbalis lift the second finger every time the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned. So every time you say Allah, you go Allahumma, it goes up. So that's why you see them kind of moving it up and down. It's because every time you say the word Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it moves up and down. And then the Malikis move the second finger right and left all throughout. So the Malikis actually sit down a little bit differently. They don't have it like this. They have it kind of towards the side. And then they just move their fingers the whole time like this. And all of these things that we talked about have evidence for them. Now I'm not going to, this was a second level fiqh. I would actually ask you to go and go through the evidence and the interpretations of why it is that every madhab did this, but that's a bit too advanced, I think, for this course. So I'll just leave you with that piece of information just to know it, because I think it's important to you to know. But this is all based on observations, meaning the ulama that looked at this, they observed certain behaviors of certain sahaba and took certain pieces of evidence and interpreted based on it, and then they came up with this, with how they thought the movement of the finger should be. But they all agree that the musabbiha is going to move. It's just they differ on when and how exactly that's going to happen. But it's a hay'ah. Hay'at for the Shafi'i is equivalent to a sunnah for the rest of the schools of jurisprudence. No sujood sahwi is needed if left on purpose or forgetfully, which is what I explained a bit earlier. Okay. والافتراش في جميع الجلسات والتورك في الجلسة الأخيرة والتسليمة الثانية. So, الافتراش في جميع الجلسات. الافتراش is a certain way of how your feet are put when you're praying. So here's how iftirash looks. If my knees allow me to do it, I will do it. So here's the right is up and the left is down. Or it could be the opposite. So it could be this way. This one's down, this one's up. But this is called iftirash. The right is up, my toes are towards the qibla, my right toes are towards the qibla, because this is how it looks. And then I'm sitting on my left foot, basically. And this is called iftirash. And all of the sittings in tashahhud, in salah, this is how the Shafi'is see the hay'ah. Now, what other methods or forms of julus is acceptable for the madhahib? This one here is very acceptable as well. Yeah. This one here is less acceptable. So when both feet are up, this is less acceptable. Actually, the majority of scholars see that as being the julus of there's nahi somewhere there. And again, there's an issue of delicate difference of opinion in terms of how the feet need to look. But the two ways that I showed you, the first two, are the ones that are a hay'ah for the Shafi'iyya. And if you put them just on top of each other and sit on them, that is fine as well. I would avoid having both feet upwards or standing up. I would avoid that, even though there are some scholars who actually look at that as being acceptable, but I would avoid it. What's definitely you shouldn't do, what you should definitely is something like this. Right? So this is definitely avoidable. So you shouldn't be sitting on the ground with your feet to the side. So that's definitely avoidable. Or any other form of sitting down, which would be just kind of normal sitting or something like that. This is all, you should avoid that. Again, this is all depending on the person's health. If for some reason your feet don't work or your knees are all busted, then sit whatever way works for you. But if you're healthy and capable, then learn how to do iftirash. And again, I'll just do it one more time. So here's iftirash. You just sit on your right, just left, just sit on your left, and just have your wansub al-yumna, and have the yumna standing up. Your toes, my toes basically are towards the qibla like I am. My big toe of my right foot is towards the qibla. So this is the iftirash. Okay. وَالتَّوَرُّكُ فِي الْجَلْسَةِ الْأَخِيرَةِ, and sitting in the matter of tawarruk in the last one. So the Shafi'is have tawarruk, and here's what you should know about tawarruk. And this is only done in the last tashahhud. And this you can do it when you're praying alone. You shouldn't do this if you're praying with people in a saf. You can do it if you're the imam, but you shouldn't do it when you're praying with people in a line, unless everyone's going to do it as well. So tawarruk is a little bit different. So if this is iftirash, tawarruk is I take my left foot and I swing it in between here, and I sit down. This is tawarruk. So I'm actually sitting on the ground with this one up and my left foot coming out this side. This is called tawarruk. And this is what you do in the last tashahhud. In the last tashahhud of a prayer, you should do this. If you do this in prayer with people around you, you will sit on the person beside you. So you can't do this unless everyone's going to do the same thing, because you will shift to the left quite a bit. So you wouldn't do this unless everyone's doing it. But this is called tawarruk. This is still standing, this is still up, but now I've swung my left foot and I put it under it and I'm sitting actually on my behind. And that is called tawarruk. And again, all of the madhahib have a certain variation of it, but it's very similar. So it's not something that the Shafi'is do alone. Everyone else has similar variations of this. And then the second taslim is a hay'ah. So like I explained, yes?
So can you have it where you have one foot kind of like where you're sitting, one foot around, and then the other one straight where you're not flexing at the back?
So if you're not going to do it fully properly, then just doesn't matter. You can just do whatever you want. Like if you can't do so if you can't do this is how the Prophet ﷺ was seen doing it. So if you can't do the full thing, do whatever you can at the end. But no, I'm showing you, this is a hay'ah. A hay'ah means it's a recommended action. If you don't do it, no problem. If you do it, you're just trying to pray more similarly to the Prophet ﷺ. So try and do the best you can, but if you can't do it, it's fine. I'm just showing you how to do it. And if you can't do it because your feet just don't bend that way, then that's fine. It's not a problem. But again, it's not something you should sweat too much about. Yeah. Yeah, for this, yeah, it is. Yeah, for this it is. And we'll point out a few things that are different for women and women in a moment, inshallah. It's coming up in the matan. And then this final taslim is a hay'ah. So the moment the imam says Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, the prayer is over. You can stand up and continue your prayer if you have things to make up for. The second one is a hay'ah. The second one is a sunnah. If you don't do it, it's not a problem. The moment you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, the first one, the prayer is already done. The second one is a hay'ah. Okay. Now I did want to get you to look at one of these pieces of evidence here, and I hope at least you're keeping up with what I'm pointing. So where is it? So this one over here, talking about moving the hands. So the Imam Bukhari said that Ibn Umar says, I saw the Prophet افتتح التكبير في الصلاة فرفع يديه حين يكبر حتى يجعلها حذو منكبيه وإذا كبر للركوع فعل مثله وإذا قال سمع الله لمن حمده فعل مثله وقال ربنا ولك الحمد ولا يفعل ذلك حين يسجد ولا حين يرفع رأسه من السجود. So this is a piece of evidence where Ibn Umar says this is what I saw the Prophet ﷺ do. I saw him say move his hands Allahu Akbar at the beginning and then do it again when he made sujood and then do it again when he came up and I didn't see him do it again after that. That's what Ibn Umar saw. Other Sahaba may have seen something different. That's why we have different opinions in these madhab, because the Sahaba are observing the Prophet ﷺ and telling us what they saw. And then the scholars look at this evidence and they choose whoever they feel had a better interpretation, a better angle, had better comprehension, and had a stronger piece of evidence, and it makes more sense. And that's how they process the evidence. And I think that's a piece of evidence that's worth knowing. So number one here is in this page. All right. So وَالْمَرْأَةُ تُخَالِفُ الرَّجُلَ فِي خَمْسَةِ أَشْيَاء. And the woman does things, yes.
When you raise your hand,
Yeah.
touch your ears or
So not for the Shafi'i. Again, the Hanafiya, yeah, they go up high. So some of them do. The mu'tamad for their madhab is that they don't. They're like the actual, but I think they say that for kids. Wallahu a'lam, just to teach kids how to do it. So they tell them touch your ears. But no, for the Shafi'iyya, it's just straight. It's up to your shoulders, and that's all that's required. Yeah. والمرأة تخالف الرجل في خمسة أشياء فالرجل يجافي مرفقيه عن جنبيه ويقل بطنه عن فخذيه في السجود ويجهر في موضع الجهر وإذا نابه شيء في الصلاة سبح وعورة الرجل ما بين سرته وركبته. So let's explain these things. So women, with respect to prayer, differ from men in 5 things. A man spreads his elbows from his sides, and this is regarding sujood specifically, and in salah where he's standing up, so his elbows go out a little bit, and during sujood the elbows go out a little bit when they're praying alone. So see, it's a little bit outwards. But again, that's when you're doing it alone or you're an imam. If you're doing ma'moom, do not shove your elbow in someone's ear, because it happens a lot. And I see people get up and they get upset because the person beside them decided that they had to do this, so they slam their elbow into their faces. And it is actually a problem. But this is what you should do when you're praying alone or you're praying as an imam. Your elbows go out a little bit. Right? Raises his stomach from his thighs during bowing and prostrating. So here's the difference. So when we're bowing, so my stomach is retracted, my arms are out straight, and my back is straight, and so is my head. For women, it's different. They kind of bring their stomachs together a little bit. They don't retract their bellies in. They let it down a bit. For men, they have to raise their stomach. And during prostrating, the same thing. So when men make sujood, they retract their bellies so you can see under them. For women, they come back a little bit and they bring it together. So it's a little bit of a different movement. For the men, you go up front. Your arms go to the side. For women, their elbows come in and they bring themselves a bit closer. So this is how it is. So it looks a little bit different. It says, subhanAllah, if something occurs during prayer, meaning if someone misses a pillar or misses a wajib or something that imam needs to be aware of something, he'll say tasbih, he'll do tasbih, say subhanAllah. Women will clap in a moment. His nakedness is the area between his navel and his knees, so he has to cover that area. And these are 5 things where there's difference between women and men in prayer. For the women, وَالْمَرْأَةُ تَضُمُّ بَعْضَهَا إِلَى بَعْضٍ. A woman draws herself together when bowing and prostrating, so she doesn't open up these. You can't see these spaces. She brings herself a bit closer together, as I pointed out. وَتَخْفِضُ صَوْتَهَا بِحَضْرَةِ الرِّجَالِ الْأَجَانِبِ. And she lowers her voice in the presence of men who are not close relatives or people who are maharim to her. وَإِذَا نَابَهَا شَيْءٌ فِي الصَّلَاةِ صَفَّقَتْ. And she claps when something happens during prayer. So a lady shouldn't scream out subhanAllah in the masjid. She should clap if something goes wrong, especially when there are men praying with her. وَجَمِيعُ بَدَنِ الْحُرَّةِ عَوْرَةٌ إِلَّا وَجْهَهَا وَكَفَّيْهَا. And a free woman must cover her entire body except her face and hands. which is what we talked about. We talked about awra, I think, a few lessons ago. So for the ladies, it's the hands and it's the hands and face. And then we talked about how feet are a little bit a difference of opinion. For Imam Muzani, he doesn't see it to be a problem. The majority of Madhab al-Shafi'i do. So she should be covering her feet as well. And if you're just wearing something long, like a galabiyya like this, but it's very long, and it's covering your feet, then that suffices as well. You don't have to be wearing socks specifically. وَالْأَمَةُ كَالرَّجُلِ, and a lady, a female slave, covers the same as a man. And this is something you're going to find all throughout Islamic fiqh, almost unanimously in every aspect of worship or other things. That a woman, the moment she is free, she carries a higher responsibility of Islamic law. And if she doesn't have her freedom, then she is not fully responsible Islamically. She's not responsible for every aspect of worship. She has much easier rulings in terms of how she behaves. You can see there's a difference here in terms of her awra in salah. When it comes to what she has to cover and what she doesn't have to cover. And this goes outside of prayer. A lady who didn't have her freedom, for men there are differences, but they don't come into rituals. They're not specifically in rituals. Men who are slaves have different ahkam, which we'll talk about, and they're not usually in rituals. But women who were slaves from it came to rituals, there were things that they weren't responsible for, unless they were given their freedom, and then they were responsible for these things. And that's an important philosophical difference. So if a lady didn't have her freedom, she didn't have to wear hijab. When it came to how she prayed, the rulings were much less strict. A lot of Islamic law was watered down for a woman who didn't have her basic freedom. For men, they still had to hold on to the rituals same, but they had other things that they weren't as responsible for. But the moment the woman became free, then she had to, if she's Muslim, then she's going to carry the full Islamic responsibility, including covering the full awra and so on and so forth. And you'll see a lot of these examples come through. And the reason being that if she doesn't have her freedom, then she shouldn't be burdened with the extra acts of worship that a free woman bears. And that's just the philosophy behind it. Because already for a woman, there's a lot of things that are a bit more difficult. If you took out nifas and hayd, then you took out hijab, there's a lot of things that are already extra for a woman to do. If she doesn't have her freedom, she can't even. Then it's not fair. So it's taken away from her. She doesn't have to do them anymore. But the moment she becomes free, then she's required to kind of fulfill all of these obligations. For men, it's a little bit different. We don't see it in rituals. We'll see it elsewhere. We'll see it when it comes to other responsibilities within marriage and other things that men have to. There's a difference in terms of their obligations. Okay. وَالَّذِي يُبْطِلُ الصَّلَاةَ أَحَدَ عَشَرَ شَيْئًا. So there are 11 things for the Shafi'is that will invalidate your prayer. These are important to know. You need to know these, and we'll talk about them a little bit. الْكَلَامُ الْعَمْدِ, intentional speech. وَالْعَمَلُ الْكَثِيرُ, an excessive motion. So you can see already we have two things that are objective or subjective. These two phrases, objective or subjective. First one, objective, right? Intentional speech, if you're speaking outside of prayer intentionally, then that's an objective measurement. But excessive motion, subjective or objective? Very subjective. A lot of excessive motion. How excessive? To what degree? So this is where they differ like heavily, and I'll talk about that a little bit for you, inshallah. A ritual impurity, al-hadath, meaning if you stand in prayer and you let gas out or something, then you have to go, fix that and then pray again. وَحُدُوثُ النَّجَاسَةِ, and the occurrence of filth. So if you find that there's filth on you, or filth comes upon you like bawl or gha'it or excessive amounts of blood, then you would need to stop your prayer and then go and get rid of your clothing and wash that and come back and pray again. Is there exceptions for physicians and warriors? And yes, there are exceptions. If you're in war, blood is everywhere. You don't have time. If you're a surgeon in the middle and you need to pray, then that's a different story as well. So there are exceptions, obviously, to some of these rulings that exist. The occurrence وحدوث النجاسة وانكشاف العورة, and exposure on one's nakedness, and I'll talk about that in a moment because this is important when it comes, because you're dressed and you're covering your nakedness, but you're basically you're wearing something very short. So every time you move, we get you get to see something we didn't want to. So that's especially the brothers. I don't understand. They come in with these. I don't know what they're wearing. It's like they went to buy. They asked for they figured out what size jeans they could wear, and then they went 2 sizes down, and then they come to pray in the masjid with it, and then they expect us to have no problem with that. وَتَغْيِيرُ النِّيَّةِ, and of course changing of intention. So what do you mean changing of intention? So it's Maghrib. So in my mind, as I was saying, Allahu Akbar, it's Isha, and then in the middle, no, it's Maghrib. No. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, astaghfirullah, atubu ilallah, and then you do it again. You can't just in the middle of prayer, like, you know what? I want to do this one. You can't be praying 2 rak'ah sunnah in the middle of it like, you know what, I didn't pray Fajr yesterday, so this is Fajr. No, it doesn't work. You have to go back and start again. So this is what he means by that. تغيير النية. You can't change intention midway during your prayer. You have to go back and start it again. That's why intention is a pillar, right? It's a rukn. وتغيير النية واستدبار القبلة, and then turning away from the direction of prayer. So if you stand in the opposite direction of prayer, then your prayer is invalid. If you're towards the direction of prayer, but you're a little bit not 100%, again, the Shafi'is are very strict in comparison to the other madhab, but still, you don't invalid your prayer if you're a little bit off. If you found that, it's like maybe 30 degrees off or something, that's fine. Unless you're praying in the wrong direction completely, in the opposite direction, then you should be okay. If like Mecca is into the east, if you're praying to the west, then you should probably, that one's going to invalidate your prayer. Wal-akl, and eating, wal-shurbu, and drinking, so you can't be munching or drinking anything during prayer, obviously. And then wal-qahqaha, which is cackling and laughter. So a smile doesn't invalidate your prayer. But if you laugh and something is heard, then your prayer is gone. And this happens a lot, unfortunately, with younger people when they're praying together. They laugh. They shouldn't, but it happens. So once you laugh, your prayer is over. You have to go and do it again. But a smile does not invalidate the prayer. It's makruh, but it's not an invalidator of your prayer. وَالرِّدَّةِ, and apostasy. So if you leave Islam in the middle of your prayer, then your prayer is invalid. And the reason they would add these things is just to be as accurate as possible. Like he's thinking of everything and anything that can validate your prayer, and he's putting them there for you. Some of them probably will never happen or never happen, but if they do, just so you know. If in the middle of your prayer you say something, and you're like, and then you go back, you can't go back in the middle of your prayer and continue. Once you leave Islam, your prayer is over. You go back and fix everything. So let's talk a little bit about the things that are important here. The kalam al-amd, wal-amal al-kathir, and inkishaf al-awra, because these are the three ones that questions usually come up for. So I have a slide. So the Shafi'i school is strict regarding covering nakedness in prayer. Shafi'is are very strict when it comes to covering nakedness, extremely strict. The issue of difference is of difference of opinion amongst the schools in general, meaning the madhab have different ways of looking at this, but the Shafi'is are very strict. The Malikis and Hanbalis are less strict and state that if a part of the body, not the genitals or the breast of a lady, is uncovered during prayer, by mistake, the prayer is valid. The Shafi'is have this as a less prominent opinion in the school. So if I'm praying, for the Shafi'is, if any part of my nakedness is exposed during prayer, my prayer is off. So if I'm wearing those jeans and I go down and now you can see my back or my lower part of my back, khalas, I have to repeat my prayer. For the Malikis and the Hanbalis, they have a little bit of a different way of looking at it. They say if a part of your body during prayer is exposed, as long as it's not the genitals, the saw'a, and it's not for the ladies, the bosom, then your prayer is acceptable as long as that was not for a very excessive long period of time. So if they're making long ruku'as and you can see, then they don't necessarily share it that way. But in general, they're okay if your prayer is still valid if only a small part of your body is exposed during the movement of prayer, but it can't be the genitals and it can't be the bosom. And for the Shafi'is, this opinion exists in the madhab, but it's a less prominent opinion. Like it's not there. It's not carried by Imam Muzani, for example, like a big name. It's carried by kind of lesser names. Yes.
I was just going to say that what I remember.
Yeah.
If it's accidental or if it's for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Then they can quickly cover it in the Shafi'i.
Yeah, exactly. So if you cover it quickly, you're fine.
Maybe it's worth noting that at least for the Hanafis and Hanbalis, and they did give a narration about a Sahabi
Yeah.
that had some holes in his toe.
Yeah.
That for a very small amount, because maybe sometimes women will have a few hairs coming
Yeah.
out of their hijab.
Yeah.
Maybe it's worth mentioning the
Yeah.
Hanafi position.
Yeah, so which is what I'm talking about here. So for this here, if it's like if it's a few hairs or there's some, and as long as it's not the genitals or the bosom, then your prayer is still valid in their opinion. For the Shafi'is, it's different, and they differ between whether it's on purpose or by mistake, and it's a little bit more complex. But maybe we can put that in the Google Classroom, inshallah, as add that to the something. So excessive motion. Let's talk about excessive motions for a moment, because that's so what is the amal that ruins the prayer? So that invalid prayers must be 3 or more major consecutive movements that are purposeless. So just major movements, as in you're moving a full. You're not just moving the fingers. You're moving like a full extremity, for example. So 1, 2, 3, we're done. Go pray again. Khalas, this is too much. Purposeless, again, meaning there's nothing that needs to happen. For example, if your phone goes off, then this movement here is not purposeless. So there's more lenience in terms of how many times you can move. So moving and turning off your phone, that's fine. But going like this and taking off your phone, and no, that invalidates your prayer. So again, it's an issue of what is now the other purposeful moves that are required for prayer validity do not invalidate prayer as long as that they are moderate. And this is again, it's a subjective measurement. So this will be left to you to kind of come up with yourself. That's why I say here, defining these terms is an issue of difference of opinion, mostly left for the worshippers, to judge. So for you, that you have to kind of judge what's purposeful and what is excessive and what is not. You just have to know that excessive motions will invalidate your prayer. So you shouldn't be moving, purposelessly. You shouldn't be doing something that's not required in your salah or required for the wellness of your prayer or the wellness of the prayers of people beside you. Yes?
Can you use your fingers to count what the rak'ah you're on?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
In terms of motion, like what about like motion of the feet? Like, can you take a step sideways?
So again, we can go into a lot of details in terms of what is acceptable. So the Shafi'is, for example, if needed, if you need to get in front, so you do takbir and then one step, then you stay for a while, and then another step. And you can keep on doing this all day long. It doesn't matter. So the problem is if you do 3 or more steps in a row, right? And then that can invalidate your prayer. Again, if it's purposeless, it's one thing. If it's purposeful, it's another thing. If you're doing it because you're just not comfortable, that's one thing. If you're doing it because right now there's people walking back and forth, or there's najasa in this area, or that the saf is up front and you don't have anyone standing beside you, then that can differ a bit. But the right way to do it is to do 2 or 3, up to 3 because the Hanbalis are okay with that. 3 and then stop, and then 3 and then stop. But again, I'm talking about more movements that aren't purposeful for the wellness or the validity of your prayer.
Some people, when they're praying, they'll like move you in the middle of the prayer to like the other side of the row.
That's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Again, purposeful movements have more leniency. So if I'm standing in the saf and I'm alone and there's the prayer over there, so for me to kind of move towards them is fine. It's preferable to do 3 and then because excessive movement. So it's funny how much in the Hanafis, for example, and the Malikis define it. They say they define excessive motion as in if someone saw you doing it, they wouldn't think you were praying. So that's how they define it. If someone's looking at you doing something and they say, oh, that person's definitely not praying. And then, oh, he's praying? Impossible because they're moving too much. So it was left for urf. It's left for what the culture is or what the norm for people is going.
For the excessive motions, is it 3 in a row or 3 total?
No, 3 in a row. Yeah, 3 in a row. 3 total. 3 in a row if they're purposeful.
No, I meant for like...
Purposeless, 3 in total. Yeah, purposeless movements, meaning I just want to scratch my head, or I want to fix my glasses, or I need to touch looking for my phone or looking for my wallet or something. Then that is only three in total. So it's an important topic because I see a lot of people, especially people who actually are in the masjid all the time, very fidgety in prayer. Extremely fidgety in prayer. They're lihya and stuff like this. No. In prayer, you stand with complete calmness and focus. The movement and the Prophet, there's a lot of hadith where the Prophet ﷺ would make people repeat prayer and point out those mistakes. So it's something worthy of kind of thinking about and watching for. So if you're praying and mothers, you're not allowed to or no, none of that is acceptable in prayer. Like if someone's doing something in the house and snapping your fingers and stuff like that's not valid because kalamul amd, if you remember, so intentional speech. Any attempt to speak to someone outside of salah will invalidate your prayer. So even if a mother is teaching to a child, yes, there may be a few scholars who have pointed out certain things, like if she has a toddler or she has someone and she's trying to keep them close because and she can't pray any other way, then yes. But in generally speaking, if your 15-year-old is picking up their phone, you can't really indicate to them that they shouldn't do that during your prayer because you're communicating with them during salah, and that invalidates your prayer. So kalam al-amd, meaning intentional speech, intentional communication is what he means with someone outside of prayer. So any communication, not specifically just speech. Again, you're trying to communicate with someone. So you don't communicate with anyone outside of prayer.
What about saying subhanallah?
So again, you're communicating with the imam. So when you communicate with the imam, by subhanallah to the imam, or you're clapping for the imam, that's for the imam. So this is in prayer, that's fine. But I'm talking about outside of salah. Someone who's sitting over there, playing with something they shouldn't be playing with. Do not snap or tasab, none of that stuff. So some mothers will raise their voices with the Quran, and I think that may be the only thing I'm okay with. Yeah, yes. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll let that go. And most scholars have let that one slide, honestly. But still, you're not supposed to be communicating with people outside of salah.
If your child is in front of you, are you allowed to move and if they're doing?
Oh yeah, around them, with them, doesn't matter.
You're allowed to move?
As in?
Like if your kid is doing something that might harm them, are you allowed to move them?
Yeah, so purposeful. Again, purposeful movements are fine. So if you're praying and you have a microphone, there's 1,000 people and the microphone falls down. You go down, you pick it up, you bring it back again, you continue your prayer. That doesn't invalidate because it's purposeful. It's for the validity of your prayer and the safety of someone else. Yeah.
If you're not praying, can you correct like the imam?
So that's a different story. So that's a whole other kind of. So whether we can correct someone while they're praying outside of prayer, for the Shafi'is, the answer is unequivocally no. For the Shafi'is, unequivocally no. If you correct someone outside of, you're not praying in prayer, you can invalidate their prayer if they listen to you. So it's a long discussion in terms of why that's acceptable and why it's not. Again, for the purpose of this course, I don't want to go into that level of depth, but if you have a specific question where a scenario you saw, you're welcome to put it in the Google Classroom and I'll answer it for you. But again, it's a very prickly one in terms of what can you do exactly in terms of communication, what you can't do. Because the Prophet ﷺ lived during a time of war. And during a time of war, the leniency of certain things kind of comes down. So the Prophet ﷺ would communicate sometimes, but it was in the middle of war. But for us, we're not, so it's a different story. So we should be a bit more strict in terms of our communication. Last one, Yalla.
This is an example that happens. Like sometimes you're coming to pray and the imam is already leaving.
Yeah.
So you might make a mistake in an ayah. So like that question is like, can you correct him before you join the prayer?
No. So if you want to stay out of any shubha, then you don't do it. 100% you don't do it. There are some opinions, but the majority is no. You don't correct them until you're in salah. ومن عجز عن القيام في الفريضة صلى جالسا ومن عجز عن الجلوس صلى مضطجعا. And the person who can't stand up in prayer can pray sitting down, and those who can't pray sitting down can pray lying down. But like I said, if you are able to stand up, then you should do takbirat al-ihram standing up, and then sit down for the rest of the prayer if you want to. But prayer is whatever you can do. Everything I'm explaining to you is based on you being in good health and able to do it. If you can't do things, don't come and ask me. You're fine. Do whatever you can. My foot doesn't go like this. I can't do it. Fine. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. But if you're capable, this is the best way to do it. But if you're not capable and there's a physical disability there, then that's not an issue at all. So I'll end, and I should always start with standing if possible, when the person can sit down, can sit within the first qiyam if needed. So these are important, these notes that I leave here. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we'll leave this until inshallah next week. So next week, I'm thinking, because we're running out of time, that we run this maybe from 6:30 until Isha. So Isha is around 8:30. So we can start 6:30. We can run for half an hour, pray Maghrib, and then continue from Maghrib until around 8-ish or something. So you can get out of here, hopefully by 8 it'll be done. If I start 6:30, 8 something it'll be done. So if you don't want to stay here for Isha, you don't have to, you can go. But I'll start at around 6:30 next week. Okay, just so that first of all, 6 is too early. I'm not getting here on time. And then if you have to end at Maghrib, it's a little bit too short. Like Maghrib is going to keep on going back because it'll be 6, very soon. If I start at Maghrib, we only have 50 minutes between Maghrib and Isha because there's a khatira and it takes so much time. So we start 6:30 inshallah next week. I'll remind you of it. And we'll go inshallah to close to Isha inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah bihamdik. Shalla la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.